your screen.
Wait, hold on here. It says we're going. Yep, we're live. I believe we are live. Oh, here we
We're,
go. We're
yeah,
live now. Yep, we're live. So I'm
but I
gonna go.
don't see the countdown clock.
Yep, I'm gonna put that on right now.
Okay,
Yep. And
it's still just 11:50, so perfect.
we'll start
There
this.
we
There we
go.
go. Hold on here. And
Outstanding.
then I
So
just
as of this moment, we are
we're live.
actually
Yep, we're live.
technically live.
There we go.
Awesome. I love your logo. It's just so beautiful. I could just sit there
Oh,
looking at it for hours.
I feel the same way about it. And one of the viewers actually designed this particular version
Wow,
of
that
it.
was really brilliant and to have it animated like this,
Uh-huh.
just glowing.
Yeah, he programmed the whole thing. And the earlier one that we had, I did it actually manually, 720 different rainbow yin yang images.
I can imagine. But this is really pretty. I just realized it matches my background too.
Uh-huh.
A lot of symbolism there.
Yeah.
They just sort of came to me in a flash one day.
Oh, that's so pretty. I mean, I like the flowers behind you too. Are those fresh flowers or?
They are fresh flowers. Yes, my garden, we just tucked our garden into bed last weekend. So these are store-bought, but for the last several months, I've been enjoying getting fresh flowers from the garden.
Oh, that's so nice. Do you have a large garden?
It's a city. I'm in the city, so it's front and back of the house, and that is plenty for now. So we do vegetables and flowers, all organic. So it's nice. We just got some beautiful carrots coming in this year and potatoes. So, and beets, we've been roasting those up and enjoying those.
Oh, that's terrific. Yeah, since I moved to Oregon, I was living out in the desert of California. And then when we moved to Oregon, I was so amazed that I could just walk outside my house, go walk just for about 2 minutes and find flowers everywhere. Like anytime I want a flower, I don't even have to look for more than a minute. Even in the winter, they're everywhere. It's definitely a relief from the desert, though I have to say I do miss the desert in ways I didn't expect.
What do you miss about the desert?
I think just the expansiveness, the openness, and I think the colors too. Like I used to always think, it things looked rather dull, but especially in the fall, the desert's really, really beautiful. And yeah, there's just a feeling of openness and freedom that you don't exactly get when there's a lot of trees around. Here there's just so many trees, which I love too, but yeah, it's and also the way it smells after it rains, like there's just these whiffs of just the most like intoxicating scents that I had no idea about until I lived there. And you don't get too much rain. So, but the rain is coming when all the smells just start to flow through your backyard. So I miss that too.
Yeah, you can see for miles in the desert. I recall going to the Southwest in usually March so that I would see the desert in bloom and then come back to Minnesota. So I would get 2 springs and then it would be spring again. And there's nothing like the desert in bloom. Very beautiful.
Yeah. And I know Jeffrey's out in the desert.
Yes.
How are you enjoying it?
Technically, I am. I'm in the high desert.
Are you enjoying your time in New Mexico?
Very much, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
Do you
You're
miss?
welcome to come visit, Deborah.
Yeah, I would love to. we had been thinking of doing the IRVA conference in New Mexico this year because the very first IRVA conference was in New Mexico, but we decided instead to do our next conference on a cruise. So we're gonna very first conference on a cruise going to Mexico in October. Yeah, we're just about to announce it. So that's going to be fun.
I think you just did. I don't know. People can hear it. Debra, people already can hear us on YouTube right now.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Really fun. We'll go to the ruins in a couple different ports and do the actual talks during the days at sea. And yeah, it's going to be just so fun because we'll be able to have our meals together, endless food and entertainment. And I think I'm most excited because, organizing these conferences is just so much work. But for this one, our travel agent is basically arranging everything. So, besides for getting the program together and just promoting it, it's just going to be so much less work. So I'm excited about that. And it's going to be pretty inexpensive too. It's pretty much for the entire conference and for the entire cruise. Like a inside cabin, it'll be about $600, and like a balcony ocean view will be like about $750 or something. So even less than it might typically cost for someone to go to an in-person conference at a hotel. So yeah, we're excited about it.
We used to do intuition cruises back in the days of the Intuition Network.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we did several.
How did that go?
Well, I think they were quite successful, actually. And they were a lot of fun, I'll admit.
Would you have a lot of people at them?
Well, if I recall correctly, they weren't officially sponsored by the Intuition Network. We were sort of a participant. There were a couple other people who sponsored them, Peter and Patricia Einstein. And they had a special arrangement where people who were teachers of intuition would get a free cruise if they brought along, let's say, 10 of their students. So using that model, I think they would have, could be close to 100 people on the cruise. So, it worked out. I think we did about 3 or 4 of them. And then things sort of petered out. I don't even remember why.
Well, I always feel like for conferences, the most important part is the people getting together, and getting to just get to know each other and have fun. Of course, the talks are always good too, but so I love the idea that we'll just be together like 24 hours a day for about 5 days or so and doing fun activities.
Yeah. It'll be a chance for people to get really close with each other, and you'll get a few of the big name speakers, and they'll draw people.
Where in Mexico is the cruise going to go to?
I don't have the names in front of me right now. I think Cancun and then to one of the ruins.
On the Pacific coast.
We leave out of Galveston.
Oh.
And
it'll be in the Gulf.
We don't have the registration page up yet, but I'm trying to pull up the email from the organizer.
Okay. Well, we're going to be starting the live stream in less than a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, there are people joining from Brazil, Germany, Los Angeles, North Carolina, London, France, Texas, Alaska, Poland, Ecuador. So all over the
My
world.
goodness.
Welcome, everybody. Yeah, we haven't officially begun, but I just wanted to say that because I just mentioned all the places, locations they're coming from. Prague.
Where people are posting that in the chat?
In
Is
the
that?
chat, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Wow, that's amazing. Hi, everyone. This is so exciting. And I know some people must be joining really late for their time, or maybe even in the middle of the night, if that's the case, and really appreciate that.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove with my co-host, Emmy Vadnais, and our new guest host for New Thinking Aloud, Debra Lynn Katz. Debra has been a guest on New Thinking Aloud many times. She's interviewed me about the PK Man, and that goes back to the early years of New Thinking Aloud, back around 2015 or 2016. Debra has a doctoral degree from West Georgia University, which is a very interesting college. That's where they house the Ingo Swann archives. That's where it's one of the rare places where if you wanted to do doctoral work in parapsychology, you could do it at that school. Debra is also the president of the International Remote Viewing Association and has been interviewed not so long ago on New Thinking Aloud about the book she co-authored with John Knowles on associative remote viewing. So Debra is an expert on almost all aspects of remote viewing. In fact, has recently published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration a meta-analysis, an overview of all of the published scientific studies on remote viewing. So many times we hear from viewers who say, yeah, you talk a lot about remote viewing, but what does the data actually show us? So Debra is an expert on the data itself and has been deeply immersed in the remote viewing community. So welcome, Debra.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you and Emmy and everyone from around the world.
Would you like to make an introductory statement, some of the things that are on the top of your mind right now?
Well, I just feel like it's so important for us to come together at this time. And, there's so much stress in the world and strife, and just to be able to come together and talk about what we're excited about and interested in. And, in some ways it's easy to almost feel a little bit guilty, like, here we are just, kind of in a state of bliss, of just being able to talk about the topics that are most meaningful to us. But, my hope is that we can create an energy here that can help people just, no matter how much suffering there is, it doesn't help to suffer along with people. It helps to, if there's action that we can take, that's terrific. But I think just, keeping ourselves sane and stable can, is only going to help everything else. So, I'm just really happy that we can be here like this today.
Well, I'm happy to be with you and happy to be with Emmy too.
Very grateful, and it's a great pleasure, joy, honor to be with both of you. You two are both giants in this field, and it's an honor to be alongside with both of you. And I'm excited to see what kind of conversation we have with the questions coming in. And Debra, what's on your mind, and also some of the ways you plan to serve as a guest host as well.
Yeah, I'm a lot of times when I speak, I end up being like rather long-winded, and then we only get to questions, the last 5 minutes or so. So I'm just so excited that today most of this is going to be questions and conversation. That's really my favorite part of, getting together with a group.
Yeah.
Well, we do have a number of questions coming in. One of our regular viewers, Andrei Slavosh-Krasowski, asked Debra if you have already made plans to interview particular people.
Well, I have made some plans. I do have an interview scheduled with one uh, uh, psychoanalyst who specializes in twin and multiple issues, and her name is Dr. Joan Friedman, and I'm going to be interviewing her next week. And then I also am going to be interviewing someone who's actually a former student and now one of the leading experts in instrumental transcommunication, Josh Lewis. And so we're going to get together next week as well. And then I've got invitations out to several people. Some of them we're not going to be able to get to until this spring, but I'm really excited. One is an expert in making earthquake predictions, and she claims to have an excellent track record. She's been to the Arctic 4 times, and she says she has her system down really well. So she's agreed. Her name's Marsha Adams. Hopefully, in saying her name, it'll really make the interview solidify happen. And then I also have been talking to some experts in cults, because I think right now there is, what we hear about lots of different famous cults, and there's a lot of talk about within the political arena, different people being drawn into different groups. I think we have to be kind of careful when we, just label things as cults, because, even that's a conversation in and of itself. What is a cult? And so I really want to talk to some experts in that, and also hypnosis. They say that you can't accidentally be hypnotized, but I feel like I have been at times accidentally hypnotized, and so has my twin sister. So I am looking for somebody who can speak to that. And I know, like, all the hypnotherapists out there, like, they don't like to put that out there or scare people, but I do think that, and it's related to the cult, that maybe there's a connection between hypnosis and people accidentally getting hypnotized. So I want to find some experts in that as well. And then I'll just say my one other idea also is, I'm interested in topics related to spirituality, where people have different dilemmas that they struggle with, such as spiritual abuse. And I'm particularly, as I know a lot of people have, over the years, where we've gotten really excited about, like, John of God or Sai Baba or other leaders who were really meaningful to us and, made a difference in our lives. And then we found out that they were really, frauds or committing really heinous acts. So I would like to talk to experts about that too, just like, how do you reconcile, these dichotomies? So that's what's on the plan for right now.
Now, one term you mentioned, and I'm not sure that all of our viewers know it, even though we've talked about it before on New Thinking Aloud: instrumental transcommunication. So just in case some viewers have no clue as to what that is,
Yes.
half of them, could you explain?
Yeah, sure. That is a term for when there is spirit communication coming through technology. So a more up-to-date term would be like EVPs, electronic voice phenomenon. So it could be auditory, like that, where spirit communication can supposedly come through like tape recorders, or there's different apps that people have developed for this, radios. So there's auditory, but then there would also be video, where there have been cases, and I'm sure, Jeff, you've had people on your show who talked about this, where people came through even on video or on TV sets, and not just any people, but people who had studied these topics at an earlier time, and then they died, and then they showed up on their friends, other researchers' TV sets. So and then, you could even say, like, spirit photography, orbs appearing on still photos or video, also falling under this category. So it's really any kind of spirit or unusual phenomena coming through technology. and
Yeah.
there's a long history of it. So, and Jeffrey, you had recently done a couple of interviews with Dr. Cordosa. Is that how you say her?
Annabella Cordosa. Yes, she's a former diplomat. She was the charge d'affaires of the American embassy from Portugal, and ran embassies around the world for Portugal. And she gave up a very promising, stellar diplomatic career when she got involved in instrumental transcommunication, because she was getting such good data. And the Portuguese State Department said, well, it's all very nice, but it doesn't help our diplomacy to start talking about this. So she had to quit her job in order to pursue that. And she's done brilliant work.
Yeah, and she had so many loved ones and different people coming through that she felt she was personally communicating with. And she's got several books. I really recommend them, and her interviews on New Thinking Aloud. And she had ran a journal for I don't know, at least a decade,
Right.
publishing articles on the topic. And you can still find them on her website. You can download those. So yeah, a lot of really great work that it's kind of obscure. Like, you don't really hear too much about the history, but there's a great website called World ITC that people can get a lot of free resources off of as well. I don't know who's still maintaining it. It looks very old, but anyone who's interested, I'd recommend that website.
My understanding is that there are maybe 10,000 or more hobbyists who are pursuing ITC, particularly in Europe.
Yeah, and I think that really anybody that would call themselves a paranormal researcher or investigator, of which, there's tens of thousands, at least in the US, people who do ghost hunting and investigations at different locations. Really, they almost all are bringing equipment with them, so they would technically fall under that. And that's another topic I'm really interested in, is this idea of lay researchers, citizen scientists, people in the general public who are conducting research, and then you've got formal academic researchers. And at least over the last 100 years or so, like there was a divide between them. And I think that we're entering into a new era where they're going to start to work more together. And that's definitely something that is my personal interest too, to see, that both operating in their different arenas and how they operate, there's different, they publish in different places, they use different language or definitions, but they're doing much of the same thing. And I think if we can bring formal researchers and informal together, they can both really benefit from that relationship and learn from each other.
Well, let me build on that, if I may, because one of my hobbies is astronomy, and I know in the field of astronomy there are many amateurs, and they often do work in conjunction with the professionals. The professionals may say, well, we've got this project, like we want to track asteroids, and they'll enlist the help of amateur astronomers in a very disciplined way so that they can get a large-scale project off the ground. And I think that with regard to ITC, one of the tricky things is that if you go in with one of these devices into supposedly a haunted house or something, and you hear voices, you don't know for sure, unless the voices are able to dialogue with you, maybe identify themselves, what's actually going on. It could be a stray radio signal. Whereas the laboratory research, I know Annabella Cordoso has done laboratory research in an acoustically shielded laboratory. So there was no possibility of a stray radio signal, not just acoustically shielded, but electromagnetically shielded
Wow.
as well, to prevent exactly that, stray signals coming in and people projecting onto the signal that, oh, this is my dead uncle or something speaking to me.
Yeah, so both are important because you might not get the effects in the lab that you would, elsewhere. And of course, sometimes it's just not repeatable. But yeah, it's so important to have both and see how we can lift up the evidence to a higher level.
It makes me think of Shannon Taggart, who has been a guest a couple times on New Thinking Aloud, who does photography among spirits and mediums. And she was sharing with me in a private conversation that she will have people send her images, videos, and photography that they've taken of orbs and other types of phenomena, and that she is able to, for the most part, she's able to help discern what seems to be more of like a legitimate, some type of, I don't know that I like to use the word anomaly, but something that seems to be outside of what you would typically see and what we perceive as the physical world.
Yeah, and just having that, helping people to rule out, all other explanations, which I know it can really seem like being a downer where people are so excited. And then, you point out like, oh, well, there's light coming in through the window and there's a reflection over there. And, did you shut this off? And sometimes people just don't think of that. I taught a class with Josh Lewis, who I'll be interviewing soon, and we had a lot of that. And yeah, it just felt like it was, a killjoy at the moment. But it is really important because really we don't want to fool ourselves. And if this phenomena is real, we want to make sure that it's real and not just something else. So that's where I think that some paranormal researchers need some extra help, with just tightening up their protocols.
Yeah. And I also like how you're planning on, well, I love all the topics that you're planning on bringing to New Thinking Aloud, and also with hypnotherapy. And it made me think of the power of suggestion, which is really everywhere. So it'll be fun to hear from your guest or guests on that topic, on what they say about how we can be more aware of that phenomena.
Yeah, people are so suggestible, and it is really, there's a documentary that came out recently about a group of college students who were led into a cult by one of their classmates' fathers. And I think it's called, I forget what it's called. It's on Netflix, and it is it's really revealing about human nature and consciousness. And that's where I think we can learn so much about the mind, but how people get drawn into a situation where then they get stuck. And in this case, the guy ended up like, he was really doing like sex trafficking of some of the people that got drawn in, and just the way that he drew them in with the level of trust, and then got them convinced that they owed him things or were guilty for things that they really didn't do. But it's a really hard film to watch, but you also start to see how people start to believe just so many lies. And then the redeeming part of that movie is at the end, like the people start to break out of those lies. But it's really hard for us to understand how people will get sucked into things, people that are very intelligent. And in this one movie, a woman, she was just about to receive her medical degree. She was a Harvard graduate, and she got sucked in and just her whole life went away. So it's a depressing topic, but if we're going to understand, how our minds work and ourselves work, I think that there's something here when we look at these kind of, really scary, disturbing, fringe topics of what can happen to people. And I know, Jeff, I'm sure you could talk about like the history of the early hypnotists, where there was so much interesting research that came out of Mesmer's work and all those early ones, where after a while they couldn't keep doing what they were doing because it was just so unethical. But we can really learn a lot from the early research where ethics weren't there. So that's something else that I'd love to have some guests who could talk about that early research. And I'm sure
telepathic hypnotic induction, for example. Well, we do have quite a few questions coming in. Here's an interesting one from Joyful Jody. She said, would love to learn more about finding missing persons, which I know often remote viewers are tasked to do that. What can you tell Joyful Jody about finding missing persons?
Yes, well, that is one activity that remote viewers, after they have a little bit of experience or training under their belt, will work with that, both finding missing persons and finding missing objects. And remote viewing is ideal for that because it's really about, it's an application of your intuitive abilities where you can describe aspects of the physical world. So describing the location where someone it has been, let's say if they were kidnapped, where are they presently now? What does their environment look like? What are any major landmarks that can be described to help find them? You can also describe, who are they with? And you can also go to different points in time, like at the time they went missing, who were they with? Where were they? Where are they presently? And one of the things also, a lot of times remote viewers are tasking themselves with looking at where will the person be found. Joe McMoneagle, who really is one of the most celebrated remote viewers, former government military remote viewers, he has helped find dozens of missing people. After the military, he went to work with a Japanese TV station, television show, where they had a lot of resources. They even worked with the Japanese government and other governments, and they were able to find people that had been gone for years, where their relatives just wanted to find them. And he did that through remote viewing. And I was at a conference where we asked him, will you please go over your method of how you would, how would you apply remote viewing to find these people? And he said that they would look at the moment where the person was going to be found, so in the future. And one example that stood out was a guy who had been lost from his brother for years. Joe traced him to he was a worker, and all these workers lived in an apartment building, and they saw him walking into the reception area of the building. So they they were able to pare down where the building was. First, they had to tune into and get features of what country is the guy in, and then what's the nearest public transportation in the city he would be in. So then they narrowed it down to the city, and then they narrowed it down to the apartment building, and they then sent the film crew to that apartment building, waited for many hours, and then sure enough, the guy walks in with some of his buddies to go up, and they caught him right before he went to the elevator, and reunited these brothers that hadn't seen each other for decades. So this is there's a lot to it, and a lot of times, unfortunately, you just can't find the person, but it at least gives you an advantage, an edge. So a lot to it.
Debra, you and I had a conversation just a couple days ago about somebody very special in your life who went missing, and I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share about that experience.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that was our Siberian Husky who is named Artemis. And this was maybe about, maybe about 8 years ago or so, when we were living out in the desert of California. And one day she went missing, and we put signs up everywhere with her picture. We could tell someone was taking down the signs. We'd see like the same footprints, but we couldn't figure out who. But of course, myself being a remote viewer, having friends and students and teachers, had dozens of remote viewers, also like other people, like clairvoyants, mediums, and we collected all the data. And we really, we had a lot of corroboration, which is very helpful when you have things that you wouldn't otherwise know. So we knew that she was with a lady who had an older son. They had horses. They lived behind a big iron gate. The problem was that, and this is typically called the search problem in remote viewing, is, you might have great data, but can you actually go out and use it? And then also, in the desert, like you might think like, oh, well, that's some pretty, particular information, like the lady has horses. So that did narrow down to some properties, but still in our area, there's still like, a couple hundred houses that have horses. And then to even be able to get behind the gate to find the people. So long story short, well, I'll just say too, that in addition to constantly doing remote viewings, because Emmy and I were talking about the topic of, one, Lynn Buchanan's name came up, and he helps with techniques to heal people, but it kind of verges on healing and mental influencing. And we were talking about the ethics of it. So I said, like, the one time that I have really broken like my ethical standards is when I would tune into the woman who had Artemis, and I would say, bring her back, just bring her back. And I was constantly, almost kind of like boring a hole in her mind, bring her back. And sure enough, 3 months after she had disappeared, we get a phone call one day. It's from a woman. She's crying. She says, I have your husky and I want to give her back. She said she had to, that Artemis would run with her horses, and she loved her, but she had to have some surgery and it was getting to be too much. And she said, I was like, how could you have done this? And she said, well, she was really thin, and we thought that maybe she was being neglected, which she was just, thin. She was thin for a husky, but she was not being neglected. So yeah, she ended up giving her back her adult son, who we had seen. She had one. He met with my husband and did the exchange. And we had Artemis for about 8 years after that. And she just passed away maybe about 5 months ago or so. But yeah, so I can't say for sure if all that psychic energy going to her made a difference, but it was pretty odd for someone to just call and say, I've got your dog. Like, she didn't even, she could have just taken her to an animal shelter or something, but she just called the number on the signs.
But you said, Debra, if I heard you correctly, that was a violation of your own personal ethical standards to try and impose upon this woman to get her to return something that belonged to you in any case, not just belonged to you, that you loved. I mean, that you had a bond with that dog. Why was that? What is your ethical standard there?
Well, anytime we talk about ethics, because this comes up all the time, when doing readings, like Emmy and I both do readings for people, and, people come with questions. They have questions about not just their own lives, but their lives intersect with so many others. So they want to know about their kids, about their parents, about, the guy they just met. Is he going to call me again? Should I, marry this guy? Should I divorce this guy? Is he cheating on me? Does he know I'm cheating on him? Just nonstop relationship questions. So So yeah, people are always wondering, like, what are the ethical standards? And, there's reading people, but then there's also like trying to influence their minds. So, I draw a line between that for first and foremost, trying to influence someone against their will. A lot of times if I do think if you do try to do those things, it doesn't turn out too well. And I do believe that there's karma too that can come back to people if they have, evil intentions. Now, does everyone have karma, or is that just set up if you have guilt about it, you'll have karma? I don't know. There's, we get into a lot of questions here. But yeah, and ethics, sometimes the line moves. So there might be different considerations for different situations. But I think of it as do no harm, do no evil. Are you doing this for everyone's betterment? And, if you get to a point, like even with reading people, I've had it where a client said, oh, can you look at this, woman that I'm in love with? And it's like, okay, let's take a look here. And I might be okay with that. But when the woman starts to say, like, clairvoyantly, like, no, get away, like a stop sign comes up, or, she looks like she's trying to break the chains or run away, and say, get away from me. And then I've had this with a few clients where I said, oh, it looks like, she's saying that she's already told you that she doesn't want to be with you. And, you're still pursuing it. And then he's like, yeah, that's true. But, will you just look, like, is she, who's she with right now? And are they going to break up? And it's like, no, I'm not going to do that, because she's already indicated, even though it's totally on a psychic level, she's already indicated she doesn't want you to be looking at her. And this is like invasive and stalking behavior, really. So, there's sometimes you don't know until you get into things if you're doing the right thing or not. In the same way, there's so many people watching this who are healers here, whether they're they're actual practitioners, or they're just, their whole being is designed towards wanting to heal. And so oftentimes we see someone suffering, we want to do something to alleviate that. And yet, when we go in and actually like do it consciously, and, if you're staying kind of present with it on a clairvoyant level, or just feeling into it, sometimes you're going to see, like, no, that person isn't really wanting me to heal them. They're not wanting that help. They're not maybe they want help, but not my help, so a lot of times we want to do things for the good, but it's not like we were asked to do that, or given permission to do that. And so there's a lot to this, just like any kind of ethics, and, everyone has to figure it out for themselves, really. But I think having these conversations can, help. What are your thoughts on that, Jeff?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what my thoughts are, because I'm not a psychic practitioner myself. I haven't been put into that situation, but we're considering, for example, right now, a project, New Thinking Aloud, which I've already posted a monologue, an in-presence monologue about, seeing if we can't mobilize our viewers to engage in focused attention with the purpose of reducing gun violence. And it might be to find individuals who, let's say, are on the verge, who have guns and are contemplating going out and doing something violent, and to send them the thought to pause, to breathe, to refrain from taking that kind of action. And I don't have a problem with that ethically. I think that's the right thing to do, to be honest.
Well, and those individuals may really be suffering and struggling, with their choice or whatever's leading them. And, they may be putting out the calls for help in different ways. So, that I think as you meditate on them and focus on them, you may just, get some impressions that would also help you to, know where are they in this journey. And then also I think doing that too, it does help make you more compassionate, to the people as well. That's the other thing I've found. Occasionally with my students, we've done exercises where we chose where I would choose a person for them to focus on, and I wouldn't tell them who it was. I would just give them like a number or some kind of code name and ask them to tune in. But it would be like a well-known politician or a historical figure, and sometimes figures that, people did not, they had very bad reputations, or I knew that, maybe my students are mostly Democratic and I was giving them like a Republican figure or vice versa. And it's almost always the effect is that they would have more compassion for the person and see them in a very different light than they typically did. I also ran a couple of remote viewing studies where we were trying to predict who was going to be the next president of the United States, and also had that same effect where the viewers said afterwards, when it was all over and they found out like who was the winner and who it had been that they were describing, because they didn't even know this was like for an election. They just, thought they were just told that they were describing any person. But their end comments were largely that they had a lot more compassion and could see the people from different angles, because, most public figures were getting such a skewed view of them from the media. So yeah, it's, I think that anytime you're doing influencing work, you're going to become more knowledgeable and compassionate. Yeah, Emmy, what about you as a reader? Do you come across these dilemmas yourself?
Yes, and I worked in healthcare for over 30 years. And so there's always ethical concerns or considerations, is maybe a better way to say that, with every individual you're working with. And so when I used to work at the hospital, I know we're talking about psychic phenomena, but just to kind of set the tone here for a moment, when I used to work at my last hospital job, I would often have the most challenging patients on a Friday at late in the day, and they might be folks who are really suffering. I was in the integrative medicine department, and we would provide massage therapy, energy healing, guided meditation that would help when they were having a really difficult time getting their stress, anxiety, and pain levels down, and we would frequently help lower that. And I would think about some of the cases of people where they were maybe in the ICU, and for all intents and purposes, multiple physicians and neurologists were saying, well, this person is brain dead, or why is the family, haven't they taken them off of the life support, and so forth. And I really came to the conclusion that it was really a case-by-case basis. And I would listen to bioethicists here. I'm in Minnesota, University of Minnesota, discussing this. And like you said, the line on that ethics can be different for different cases. So for me personally, again, it's case by case, but I generally come from the perspective of assisting the person who's in front of me. So when it starts involving other individuals in their life, I come from the perspective of how is this assisting the person in front of me versus, influencing the other person for the person in front of me's, their own gain, if you will, unless I have the consent. But when I did used to work in the ICUs, and frequently in the ICU, people are unconscious as far as they're not able to open their eyes, maybe they're hearing, right? We know from cases like Eben Alexander that of course he went into other dimensions, but we know that in other experiments that people can hear. And so we would, for example, there would be somebody who's maybe agitated, sometimes having hallucinations or going into a psychotic state, unfortunately, would occur in the ICU with medications and just the condition the person was experiencing. And so, for example, the nurse or the physician might have requested our presence, or a family member. And if they had not, certainly if it was a medical person, we would go in anyway. But even if the family wasn't available, we would check in. And usually I made this my best practice anyway. I would check in on a psychic intuitive level to see how the patient was in their spirit, their energy, their consciousness. And most of the time people were really receptive to that kind of care. So I developed that my psychic intuitive sense even more strongly because of going in and out of those environments, and even interestingly developed a bit of an understanding of which people are, because in the hospital it's a portal, really can be in many of those areas of, is a person going to stay earthside or not? And I started to kind of develop a sense of who was on the fence, who was going to stay, who was going to go. And so it was interesting because it was frequently would validate it. Now I haven't done a study on that, but that's one of the ways that has helped strengthen my own intuition as well.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, that it is a portal, and it's going to be so different for each person.
Yeah. Yeah. And since we're talking about ethics, there's a question here from a person. Their YouTube name is World of David Wood Fantasy and Folklore Art, who asked, could you talk about psi powers and their use for positive and negative outcomes? If the governments are using them for nefarious reasons, could a higher power such as God take them away? Or even just the topic of, whatever thoughts you have on that topic.
Yeah, well, just keeping with, what you just expressed there. So who is defining nefarious, or is it, what's the purpose? So, for us, let's say another government is doing something against the United States or Americans, that's something, we have one perspective of that, but they might have a different perspective. Like maybe it's being done to help their country or to help their citizens. So, a lot of times you may have these two competing agendas. But I think the question, he was asking what you can do about it, or
well, could you talk about the psi powers and their use for positive and negative outcomes? So that's sort of, in that realm of ethics, perhaps. And then also if the government is using them for nefarious reasons, they're just asking, could their powers be taken away by some higher power?
Yeah, well, I think people are just like people are using all their other abilities and skills for good and for bad, right? Like you use your intelligence to help people and to hurt people, your charisma, your, every single ability or skill that any person has can be used for any reason. And I really see our intuitive abilities in the same way. Like I don't see them as like separate from, our ability to see or to think. It's just what we're using them for. And I think if you have your own ethics, that you shouldn't use your abilities for evil or for to hurt people, and that's your ethics, but you do it anyway, that's where it comes back and hurts you. Like I've had, when I was younger, a couple of times I got mad and tried to use my psychokinesis to make something happen. And it did happen, but it happened against myself because that goes against my ethics. Now, will that happen for someone who is like a sociopath and they just don't care? It may not happen at all. They may not feel guilt. It might be tied to that. I don't know if it's tied to that versus, some larger universal law. I kind of think there is a larger universal law, but I even, with all the work I've done, I can't say for sure. But, psychics are misusing their abilities all the time. Like when you hear about fraudulent psychics, scamming people for thousands of dollars. Well, how did they do that? They a lot of times they were able to do that because they were being psychic about some things, so because you might think, well, how did a reasonable, logical person end up, thinking they had to give, some psychic on the street, like, thousands of dollars to remove a curse? How did they get led into that? Well, it's because that person sometimes told them very specific things about their lives that nobody else could have known. So they proved that they were psychic, but then unfortunately the people believed them that, oh, like this, must be so, like I must believe them and what they're saying. So our abilities are getting misused all the time. But I think, that's just part of being human.
Yeah, I want to dovetail on what you just said, Debra, which is a lot of wisdom, and also Jeff, who has announced this upcoming project that I'm really personally very excited about with reducing gun violence, because I recently read the book The Power of Eight by Lynne McTaggart, and that interview is going to be coming out in a couple days now. And what you just shared about how you were using your powers and it came back negatively on you, Lynn has found that there's a mirror effect that can happen when people are engaging in a group intention. And I don't want to spoil the book or the interview too much, but I just want to encourage everybody to tune in on Wednesday when that interview is released. That is all about group intention and psychokinesis, but there's a really beautiful phenomena that can occur when people do use their powers for good.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to see that.
We have a question here from a viewer named Chris Scarpantonio, who asks, what is the most compelling evidence of psi for you?
That's a great question.
For me, over my own experiences of it, like first and foremost, are always what's most important. But when you're getting very, very specific information, and I've been, even right before we got together, I've been reading a biography by one of the most best researched physical mediums, Leslie Flint. And Jeff, you probably wrote about him in your winning essay paper, but he was a direct voice medium where he would go into a trance, and then instead of the spirit speaking through his own mouth, they would speak through the air. So direct voice is where it didn't have to have his voice, but people sitting there, whole auditoriums of people would hear the voice like coming from a space like at a distance from him. And supposedly that was being created because ectoplasm or some part of his energy was like creating kind of like a microphone off at a distance. But everyone would hear the voice, and the voices were very particular, and they would want whoever was present, their loved ones, to really know that it was them, and they would give extreme details, like, I'm in 1947, we were at this restaurant and this person walked in and this happened, and just such particular details that nobody else would know, nothing they ever told the people, and they're saying it in like the voice of how they used to talk. And there were so many incidents like that were observed by so many people. So, those are the extremes. I mean, I could, give so many examples from my own life, but I never, just the idea of a voice just starting to talk like as clear as day. I've certainly not experienced that personally, but I would love to. So, yeah, Jeff, are you familiar with him?
Leslie Flint, I am, but I didn't mention him in the essay. There was so much other good evidence, but we have, in fact, in the New Thinking Aloud catalog, a lengthy interview with Robin Foy, who was the founder of the Skoll Group, one of the most important experimental groups involving physical mediumship. And it turns out, Robin, when he describes how he developed in his work in physical mediumship, he became close friends with Leslie Flint and followed his work for many, many years. He even described attending his funeral.
Wow.
And, he was convinced over decades of knowing Leslie Flint that his work was authentic, even though I'm sure anybody who tries to research the case of almost any great medium, will find, that there will be detractors.
Well, my recommendation to people is like that they read like your paper and all the great essays that came out of the BICS contest to like learn about the different ones, but then see if you could find their biographies, because I'm finding in reading, I've been also reading D.D. Holmes' biography, and also Edgar Casey's biography and autobiographies. If you could reading in their own words, there's an energy that comes through, and I really start to feel like these are my friends, and I feel like it helps me like enhance my own abilities and just makes me feel better. So I highly recommend reading their autobiographies. And as far as the best evidence, the skull experiment, the skull, there was the book that was written by the participants, but then there was also the study by the SPR researchers that you could find online. And then there's the movies. And then I know different people have talked about it on New Thinking Aloud, but if you want just a collection of the best evidence all together, like it doesn't get any better than that. And really they were found by the researchers who studied them for, what was it, like a year or 2
years.
That they found it legitimate. They did not find, any sign of fraud or anything like that. And just on every phenomena under the sun that you could imagine, with like images appearing on photographic film that was brought by the researchers, and so many apportations or apports, and just materializations. So the evidence is out there, really, and that's the thing. It's out there. And now what I think is an interesting topic is, where do we go from here? And I know like researchers at IONS, like Helena Wabe and others are, really looking at that question. There was a recent symposium that I had the honor of attending by maybe about 20 or so parapsychologists around the world who asked that question. We all kind of took a topic in related to physical mediumship, and then shared it with each other, and then really asked the question, like, where can we go from here with this, with the practice and, with the evidence. And I'm not sure if we actually did answer that question, but, I think that that's a big question for all of parapsychology right now. Like, we've got the evidence, but now what do we do with it? And one thing I think is sharing it, because so many people still don't know about the evidence. And the Bigelow Institute is helping with that, getting the word out for sure. But how do we make use of this? What's the next step? I think that's really what we need to talk about next.
Well, speaking of talking about next, I want to address a quick question. I want to address it quickly. The A-man says, is Jeffrey's health okay? I'm in great health. He says, why is he retiring? I'm not retiring. And never said I was. But if anything, bringing on new people on New Thinking Aloud is an example of expanding, not retiring.
And that's an example of using bringing forth all of your great evidence you found over the years, Jeffrey, to bring it to more people. And I think having more hosts on allows us to connect with more thought leaders in these fields to help bring it to the public.
Which is our goal, and which is why we put up so many videos every week, is because this field is so rich with information, and because the educational and religious and scientific institutions in our culture are basically treating this evidence as if it didn't exist at all. So I feel like it's up to us to do our part and I hear from viewers all the time as to how meaningful these conversations are. So we're going to keep going, and our goal is to continue expanding. This year we've launched a new magazine, and now we're looking at what we can do in the area of education as well. So it's onwards and upwards. I'm not thinking of retiring at all. It's nowhere on my mind.
And we're grateful for that.
We're not letting him go anywhere. We know where he lives.
Well, and it's helping bring awareness to people about these abilities that we all really have. And, if I can just speak from my perspective, that one of the reasons I'm such a fan of helping bring education out about these topics, and particularly with intuition or psychic phenomena, if you will, however you want to term that, is that it can really enhance all of our lives, each personally and then collectively as in society and culture. So something that I actually just had the good fortune to contribute to a couple chapters in an interdisciplinary health textbook on spirituality and health and wellness. And so I'm hopeful to see more of these topics in textbooks. I know there's a project that New Thinking Aloud is working on related to that in a way with education as well, that these topics can really go more into all areas of education, even down to pre-K, kindergarten, up to, advanced degrees.
Yeah, and I think we really need to do what we can to both bring this further into academia and to one project that I'm hoping to do soon is to analyze introductory psychology textbooks to see how they're presently handling the topic of just any parapsychology topic, because I know as of a few years ago, when I was teaching Introduction to Psychology for the first time, I was very shocked at how some of the textbooks were handling these topics from a completely skeptical standpoint. And I really made the mistake. I assigned my students the first chapter of a book, and I have to admit, I did not read the chapter myself before I assigned it. And sure enough, on page 3, there is an example, and this wasn't even it was just the introduction to the whole textbook, but they were using examples of how pretty much equating parapsychology with just fraud and lack of critical thinking, and the same messages that you've heard from skeptics for years, but it was right there in the textbook. And I was just horrified that I had assigned them this chapter. And if I'd seen that, I probably would have chosen a whole other textbook for the students to work from that semester. So, I think that those people are clearly not educated, because after, 150 years of psychical research with all these studies, that's the best that they could come up with. There's a problem here. The information is not reaching other scholars. It's not reaching outside of the parapsychology field. It's not reaching textbook authors or publishers. And, this isn't going to change unless we make it change. That's where I'm really coming to the conclusion that nothing changes unless you don't have activism behind it. And, the skeptics know that. There's a great book that came out a few years ago called Skeptical About the Skeptics, and it gives perspectives of many of the leading parapsychologists. Jeff, I don't know if you were interviewed for that, but Dean Radin and Stanley Krippner and many others. And I was so happy to see that book, because it really raised awareness of how these skeptics, most of them are not scientists, but they're activists, and they're well organized. And so, meanwhile, the parapsychologists and psychical researchers and everybody else, we're just busy doing our work, trying to get our work out. But we've got to do more with the work that's being done. And that's something I'd really like to see we're probably all three of us are members of multiple parapsychology and psychical research organizations. And that's something that I'd really like to see the organizations come together and figure out, like, how can we start to make changes? Because I think kind of the older guard, like I've had this topic with some older parapsychologists, and they're just like, I gave up a long time on trying to, convince anyone of anything they don't believe in. But, that attitude is just not going to help. So that's where I think we need to be. I would like to really see, even in the APA, like a whole American Psychology Association, I'd like to see a whole division. They've got a division devoted to transpersonal psychology, but where parapsychology is supposed to be in there a little bit, but it's not. And I would like to see parapsychologists like just descend on the APA, like have 100 people every single conference apply to speak at the conferences, and just do a whole bunch. There's so much that we could be doing, but the New Thinking Aloud is the one venue that is reaching these people. And I know, because I have people contact me who say, I've always been interested in these topics, but I'm afraid it's going to make me look less professional. I'm afraid what it'll do to my academic career, and, what my friends and colleagues will think. And they tell me, like, I saw these interviews on New Thinking Aloud, and this is like the one place I feel like I could go, this community that I can feel myself. Like, I don't feel afraid to talk about these things with other people who watch this show. And the show is making a real difference. It really is to those people, so many people. So,
well, I think, Debra, something that you said earlier may not be correct, which is that there is a division of transpersonal psychology within the APA. If that happened, it's new to me, because years ago there was an effort to do that, and it was voted down when Rollo May, a person I admired a great deal, the existential psychologist, argued that the transpersonal psychologists were trying to push religion in the name of psychology. And as a result of that, they wouldn't allow a division of transpersonal. There is a division of humanistic psychology in the APA. And I think that's as far in this direction as they've been willing to go.
Yeah, I think when I went onto their site, I did see there may be in the last few years one that has come about. And I think someone, if I recall correctly, at one conference, it was either for the Parapsychology Association or maybe the SSC, where they talk, but we'll have to look at that. But yeah, and well, even the humanistic movement, like I know it was, and maybe you can speak to this because you would have been around at that time, but there was hope that within that movement originally they would be accepting of parapsychology, but instead it turned out to be just the opposite. Could you speak to that? Because I found documents when I was researching in the Ingo Swann archives. Ingo was very interested in these topics, and he had lots of correspondence going back and forth, where at first he was expressing hope about the humanistic movement, and then he was so bitter about it just even a few years later that they seem very close. But it seemed like, at least at one point, the movement was being maybe one of the leaders was very opposed to parapsychology.
Well, you see, the problem with calling it the humanistic movement is that there are different branches, and there's the Association of Humanistic Psychology, which is very open to transpersonal psychology. The Association for Transpersonal Psychology came out of the humanistic psychology movement, and the founders, people like Abraham Maslow, were active in founding both organizations. But then you have the American Humanist Association, which is basically aligned with the so-called skeptics. It's an example of, I'm sad to say, because my Republican friends seem to think that all Democrats are Marxists, but the association or the American Humanist Association actually did descend from Marxists, and they are basically atheistic Marxists, and turn out to be very sympathetic to the scoffers. They call themselves skeptics, but they're not, in my view, real skeptics at all. The first rule of skepticism is to be skeptical of yourself, and that's the last thing that the scoffers are. They believe they already have the truth, and that they know beyond a doubt that parapsychology is impossible. So there's no point even at looking at the evidence from their point of view. It can't be correct.
That's a great point. So it gets confusing talking about these topics when there's so many different organizations and philosophical differences
and biases, beliefs
Right.
that block being open to other information. So, but I love what you're saying, Debra and Jeff, of course, of taking action to really infiltrate into the education system. Because I recall now, it's been nearly 30 years, believe it or not, since I've been in college myself. And I remember my psychology textbook, and it was basically, talking about ESP and so forth was just, barely a paragraph. And I thought, well, that's strange. I remember hearing about like the Rhine Institute, and my father would have us play with cards and just kind of, see what we could do with that. And I was sad. I was disappointed that in the psychology profession, there wasn't more critical thinking and analysis of that. So I think, and there's some comments coming in the chat about how New Thinking Aloud is helping to raise awareness on these topics. And I like that idea of taking further action as well, Debra.
Yeah. My first parapsychology class I ever took was offered by a statistics professor when I was an undergraduate. I was only about like 20, maybe 21 years old at University of Montana. And I was so excited that there was actually a class about these topics because I had been interested in them for years. And so I took the class, and the room there must have been 300 students there. And as the semester went on, I grew so frustrated because the class was being taught by a skeptic, and the whole class was designed to show how people can fake these things. And it was kind of ironic, though, because I saw my very first aura during that class. I would sit in the back and I'd be so angry at that teacher, and I could hardly contain my anger. So I just started praying. I would just pray the whole class for forgiveness for this man. And suddenly one day, like, I saw his aura, like full color, glowing with my physical eyes, something I've never quite seen like that since. But yeah, so I have a skeptical instructor to thank for that. But it was beyond frustrating for sure. And, I felt sad because at that point, I knew these things were real because of my own life experiences, but I felt really sad for the other students who maybe hadn't had as many personal experiences, who, may have closed off to the topic because of that orientation.
Yeah. Well, and more people are practicing meditation and yoga. And so we know that those are some of the primary ways of developing some of these abilities. And so more people are becoming more aware of these experiences. And I think that's also why programs like New Thinking Aloud are expanding.
We have a question here from a viewer whose name, I believe, whose YouTube name, I believe, is Scientific Proof of Magic. And then he identifies himself as Josh, who says, do you have any professional tips for newbies to this field who want to get into offering intuitive services?
Yeah, well, before you offer the services, you want to get practice. And, you may benefit from training and instruction. And there's, so many different people these days that you can learn from. There's books, there's ourselves, our teachers, but, there's so many others, different psychic training schools, clairvoyant training, remote viewing. Emmy and I were talking about this the other day, and we're both advocates of just learn as many different approaches, learn from as many different people. But the bottom line is practicing. Can keep practicing, and wait. My attitude is wait to do it professionally until you practice on a lot of people, and then you get to a point where people are saying like, wow, you just helped me so much. I feel like I need to give something back. You'll start to feel that there's an unequal exchange if you're spending time with people and, applying everything that you just spent so much time learning and developing. And that's when like there'll be a natural progression to, offering your services professionally. But yeah, read everything. There's so many books that, on developing your abilities, and so many videos, and you can just spend all day long. But it's not just reading; it's putting it into practice and meditating, and doing the other practices, living a healthy lifestyle that supports all of that. Because if your life is in chaos and you're doing things like drinking too much or drugs or other things like that, it's not going to facilitate that. Then I'd also say too, though, that, be a well-rounded person as well. Get education in other areas, have skills in other areas too, because it's really easy to get unbalanced with this work as well. And you don't want like this only to be the only thing that supports you, because that could just put too much pressure, and then it can lead you into ethical dilemmas, where you can't be doing psychic work in the amount that you could do other work. So for example, like I could easily sit and write at my computer or do work on my computer for 20 hours straight, like barely any breaks. Not good for the body, but not a problem. But 20 hours straight of psychic work, could take weeks to recover from, and you just can't keep it going like that. And sometimes you need long periods of breaks, or you're just going to be weaker and more tired. And so you need to have other ways to support yourself during that time. I'd say that's truly really for anyone that works with other people. And, unfortunately, therapists, psychologists, nurses, doctors, they get burnt out, they get worn out, and they don't have a way. They're part of a system that doesn't give them those breaks. So that's a whole other topic, but yeah, Emmy, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I love everything you're saying, Debra. And for some reason, this is coming in my mind. I would say to ask yourself why you want to work intuitively with people. Are you wanting to provide intuitive assessments, evaluations? Are you wanting to work as a medical intuitive? Where are your gifts? I think would be really my first place to start with, is what are your strong suits? And if you're not sure, like Debra suggested, maybe take some training with a few different people or read some different books and see what really floats your boat, what really gets you excited and makes you feel passionate of how you want to serve with your unique gifts. Or do you want to help people with their intuition? And one other piece that came to mind when you were speaking, Debra, is to really spend time with that verification process, that validation of when you are accurate with your intuition, so that you can understand what conditions are necessary for you to be successful with your abilities, because that is going to help you to be successful doing it professionally. And I also really like what you're saying, Debra, about being aware of your lifestyle. so that you can be a good instrument when you're serving others. Yeah.
Here's a question from a viewer whose YouTube name is Boo.
Hmm.
And Boo is talking about the mechanism for ESP. And he says, or he or she says, Joseph Chilton Pierce postulated an electromagnetic mechanism for ESP, but maybe Michael Talbot's holographic extrapolations might be a better fit as a model. And I wonder if you have any thoughts do you think we're going to ever come up with a physical mechanism for how psychic functioning works?
Yeah, good question. I'm curious. I'm not familiar with those sources, but taking notes there to look into those. A mechanism. I mean, do we have a mechanism for our soul or the part of us that, it is possibly exists after life? I think if we can find that, then we'll have answers to everything else, because I really look at our psychic abilities as the abilities of our soul. If it is true that consciousness lives on, then consciousness then communicates psychically, right? Like you don't have a physical body, but you still can get thoughts across, and you can still, move yourself around. And so, yeah, there's, it's always interesting to, like, I think it's a really interesting question and important. And yet, we don't need to have any understanding of the mechanism to actually have the experiences or make use of it. Although that being said, I'm going to backtrack. If we fully understood the mechanism, could we even fine tune it more? Would having that understanding help us make even more use of it? If it would, then I'm all for that course of explanation. But sometimes it seems like there's people that feel like they need to understand that before they can even accept these topics or explore them. And that's where I don't think that's so helpful, is that attitude. I think in only exploring them are we going to be able to answer the question about the mechanism.
Well, and do you think that with some of the neuroscience research that a mechanism seems to be that really we're opening up to something greater than ourselves, there's neuroscience research that the brain seems to actually not be functioning when some of these phenomena are occurring?
Well, I think what the research is doing, it's like continuing to build more tools to be able to measure the effects or the outputs. So, there's more and more refining of the tools. And, I am very excited about the brain research. The International Remote Viewing Association just had a combined conference with the Monroe Institute. And one of my good friends who I went to University of West Georgia with, Nancy Walter, she's one of the co-researchers of Monroe, leading the brain research right now. And they're doing really exciting work into what happens in a remote viewer's mind when they are within the brain through the EEG tests. And also, they're looking to see, is there a change when like someone first comes in and they test their brain and then they put them through either like remote viewing training or their discovery program where they have them listen to different audio programs and see the changes. And is there a change in their remote viewing skills? Does it go up? So Nancy just asked me to evaluate like about there were about 40 transcripts from about 20 different people that were going through the program. So I was really excited to see, was there a difference before and after? And there was a little bit, like the transcripts had a little higher ratings after they went through their program, but they actually did quite well, like all the viewers, with describing the targets, like both before and after. But some people also, Judith Pennington, who some people might be familiar with, who she's done a lot of brain research and just spoke at our conference, and she says that they've really pinpointed, like, I forget the terminology she uses, but like really you could think of it as the sweet spot in the brain, like what the exact like combination of brain waves of when you're really on target. And in knowing that, then you can do like biofeedback. You could really train yourself even more to go to that exact spot that you want to be in, to be getting the accurate information. And I know that there's some work being done in that area in mediumship as well, with the Windbridge Foundation and other people. So it is really exciting to see what's going to come out of that.
That's awesome that you're involved with that, Debra. And I also just want to say, let's not forget the heart and other portals or vortices that might also play a role in all of this.
Well,
so I know oh, go ahead, Debra.
I was going to say that's such a good point, because that there's that question a lot of people have, like, why do we need to even research this? Like, is this getting away from just the meaningful part of this work? And that is an important question. Jeff and I have talked about, like my early training was at the Berkeley Psychic Institute, which was, going back to the early 1990s. And when I started training there, and even the whole time, like, they didn't want to have anything to do with scientists. And Louis Bostwick, who founded the organization, he felt like as soon as you went into like psychology or science, you were totally getting away from the whole purpose, which was the being in touch with your spirit and soul and the abilities of your soul. And you would just get, straight out of that. And there's a lot of people who believe that, and I totally understand why, because as soon as you move, especially when you're like in the moment and in the vibe, the energy, the moment you start to bring in like, oh, is this real? How do we study this? Now you've like left your psychic space and now you're in an intellectual space. You're analyzing, you're messing things up there. And so it's an important question. And for some people, they don't need to go into the scientific arena or whatever. They already know the truth, for themselves. And they're better off just being able to stay in the vibe that where it's going to work the best.
But you decided to go into research.
I did. Yes. That's true. But part of it was not because to prove anything, although you can't do any kind of psychic related research without that always being an issue, as I found out early in one of the first projects I did with a group of other researchers. We received a grant from the International Remote Viewing Association. So that was my very first research project. And I was working with a couple of people, Lance Beam, who was a plant biologist, and he wanted to know if remote viewers could tell if a plant had a virus or not, and if it was healthy or not. And so we formed a little research team and developed our remote viewing skills first, and then we developed some different trials or different designs and ran a bunch of trials, like could we tell if a tomato plant had a virus or not. And from that, we decided then we wanted to do another project where we took 40 remote viewers, maybe about 43, and we didn't tell them what they were describing, but we wanted to see, could they describe a virus and how would they describe it? And not only that, but could they answer a question that would be important to scientists? Because we wanted to see if, how can we make use of remote viewing, and can remote viewers help scientists answer unknown questions? So we wanted to know, we picked a question, what's the replication? What is the trigger or cause for replication in a virus? And like, remote viewing is oftentimes done in a blind manner. So we didn't tell the viewers that was the question, but wrote that in an envelope, just assigned a target number to it and gave it to the viewers. And then we recruited scientists who were going to analyze the viewers' transcripts. And we found some interesting things during that analysis process, one of which was that they could only say, yes, this is to analyze it. How are they doing it? Well, first they want to see, is this correct or not? So you can't get, we found before they could say, yes, this, we found the trigger for replication in these sessions. First, they wanted to know, is this correct or not? And that wasn't even the point of this study, but, they did that and they found that there was more correct than incorrect. But then the next problem was that if the answer didn't conform to what they already thought, then they would just ignore what was there. Now, not everyone would ignore it, but it takes a special kind of person to say well, here's the data, and I've never heard of this before. I haven't thought that this variable would make a difference with this, but half the viewers just said this is important, so maybe I should pay attention to it. So there's a lot of problems with that, where you just can't get away from, you have to first see, is it correct or not? And then you get into, is this even happening here? But really what I wanted to do with research was to see how we could increase our performance with our psychic abilities. That's, ultimately, and understand it more, how to make use of it.
That's a very clear explanation, Debra. Thank you for that. We have just a few minutes left, and I do see one question from Arlene Hopkins, one of our volunteers, who is asking to expand on an idea that we were discussing in the very beginning of our program. And maybe you could conclude with your thoughts on this, Debra, or any other final thoughts you'd like to leave with our viewers, which is, where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, that's it. That's, the big question. I think we, keep doing what we're doing. We're trying to bring in, as with our interviews, bring in as many guests to share their wisdom and knowledge. And, in a way, we're collecting data here as well. Every time everyone that's interviewed on this show has a lifetime of experiences, of data, of ideas. I mean, if you just mind the apart from, that it's interesting to listen to and we can all learn from it, but if you just took all the knowledge that is on this one show and put it together, that could advance us by light years. So I think just, being open to new topics, new guests, but, keeping the standards high as far as, we want people that are experts that, and for me, it's not just getting back to what Emmy was saying, about the heart, that it's not just intellectual knowledge, but, all the people that are watching the show, they have important work to do. There's so many practitioners here, experiencers, but, people that work with other people that, have, are part of organizations that can help the world. And so, us coming together, hopefully, and not just those that are doing interviews or are running the interviews, but that are watching and listening to the show, hopefully the guests can help help on every level, whether people are struggling, with some of the issues we talked about that we'd, like to know about, struggling as a healer, struggling as a therapist, struggling as a human being on this planet right now, whatever we can do to help with that. And I think a lot of it will happen through intention as well. But, so basically this is a long answer to say, I have no idea like where we're headed or where we're going, but I think just to put the intention out that, together as a community, our goal is to bring it forward and, see what we can do. And, there's always the question, are we here to fix things? Like, do we need to fix the planet? Do we need to transform it into something that is currently not even, we may be headed somewhere where we can't even fathom yet. And that's kind of my hope. Like, what if our future is going to look like something so different, hopefully, something pleasant, but so different that we can't even imagine it. Like, and what if we could actually have guests on this show talking about topics that none of us have ever heard of before? Even Jeff with all his experience, what if someone shows up and talks about something and he's like, oh my gosh, I've never heard of this before. I've never thought of this before. That I think that would be a great goal for us moving forward. If he's not heard about it before, then probably none of us have, and that'll be pretty excited. So let's look for that new knowledge.
Thank you so much, Debra. I'm looking forward to your interviews. It's been a pleasure to be with you today and to be with Emmy as well.
Well, thank you so much.
Do you have any last thoughts to share with our viewers, Emmy?
I just want to say thank you all for being here. And this has been a very enriching, heartwarming and inspiring conversation. And I just want to echo what Debra has said about, I believe we're raising awareness and helping educate and continuing the vision of Jeffrey Mishlove and New Thinking Aloud. Do you have any final thoughts on where we're going, Jeff?
Well, I want to encourage our listeners and our viewers, if you're not already a subscriber, to subscribe. And if you are a subscriber, to make sure you press the bell button so you get notifications of our new releases. And in particular, when we go live with live streams, you have to press the bell to get those notifications. And also, if you go to the New Thinking Aloud Foundation website, you can sign up for our free weekly newsletter packed full of information for you. And you can even download for free our quarterly magazine.
And Jeff or Emmy, is there a way for people, if they have ideas for like show topics, guests, anything that they'd like to recommend, is there a way for them to get in touch?
Oh, you'll be hearing from them, Debra. Yeah, people know how to reach us. There's an address on the YouTube website. It's friends@newthinkingaloud.com, where people can send their recommendations, and you'll find it on the comments to all of the videos. People are always saying you gotta, even today in the questions, several people have recommended possible topics or possible people for new interviews. So there will be no shortage of such recommendations.
Yes, that's terrific. We definitely want to hear from everyone.
Okay, well, it's been a great pleasure, and I want to thank the two of you for being with me, and now we'll end the live stream.